Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the frostbitten world of medieval peasants, where surviving the coldest nights feels like a game you're not quite winning. Picture this. You're trudging through a snow-dusted village, the wind slicing through your threadbare cloak like a knife through stale bread. Stars glitter above, sharp as icicles, but there's no romance in this freeze. Your toes are numb, your breath clouds the air, and the thought of a warm bed is about as real as a dragon's hug. Honestly, you probably won't survive this without some serious peasant grit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're chilling tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Winter in the medieval countryside hits you like a slap from an angry lord. It's the 13th century, somewhere in the muddy heart of England, and you're a peasant, low on the food chain, high on problems. The sun's barely crawled above the horizon before it quits for the day, leaving you in a world of gray slush and bone-deep cold. Your home, if you can call it that, is a wattle-and-daub hut, walls smeared with clay and straw, roof leaking where the thatch has given up. The air inside smells of damp earth and last week's cabbage. You stamp your feet, trying to coax feeling back into them, but the cold's got a grip like a moneylender on payday. Your family's huddled near the hearth, if you're lucky enough to have one, because fire's the only thing standing between you and turning into a human icicle. Let's set the scene. It's not just cold, it's medieval cold. Historians peg average winter temperatures in northern Europe back then at around 0 to 5 degrees Celsius during the day, dipping below freezing at night. That's chilly enough to make your teeth chatter like a skeleton in a windstorm, especially when your house has all the insulation of a sieve. The Little Ice Age hasn't fully kicked in yet, but don't kid yourself. Winters are brutal, and climate records from tree rings show some years were so harsh, even the rivers froze solid. You're not just fighting the cold. You're fighting hunger, darkness, and the creeping dread that spring might never come. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants believed the frost was a punishment from mischievous spirits, so they'd leave out bits of bread to appease them. Good luck with that, because those spirits aren't bringing you a space heater. You glance around your hut, eyes stinging from the smoke of a weak fire. The floor's packed dirt, maybe strewn with rushes if you've had time to gather them. No glass windows. Those are for fancy folk. So the only light comes from the fire's flicker or a tallow candle that smells like burnt mutton. You're not alone in this misery. Your spouse, kids, maybe a grandparent or two, are all crammed in here, sharing the same air and the same shivers. Privacy? Forget it. Comfort? Laughable. Your bed's a straw-stuffed pallet on the floor. Share with whoever's closest, because body heat's the best blanket you've got. Historians still argue whether peasants slept better in these communal piles, or the constant elbows and snores made rest impossible. Either way, you're too cold to care. The cold shapes everything you do. You can't just pop to the store for a hot cocoa, and there's no thermostat to crank up. Every scrap of warmth is hard-won, every calorie precious. You're burning energy just to keep your heart pumping, and the food you scrape together in autumn grain, turnips, maybe some dried peas, is dwindling fast. A mainstream fact to ground us. Medieval peasants relied heavily on cereal crops like barley and rye, which made up about 70% of their diet, according to surviving manor records. But in winter, those stores are ration tight, and if the harvest was bad, you're staring at starvation by February. You might joke to your kids that the rats in the grain sack are just extra protein, but the knot in your stomach isn't laughing. You shuffle closer to the fire, its glow barely reaching the corners of the room. The logs crackle, spitting sparks, and you're grateful for every flicker heat, even if it comes with a lungful of smoke. Firewood's a luxury, Gather from the Lord's forest if you're bold. Scavenge from hedges if you're not. Burn it too fast, and you're out of luck. Burn it too slow, and the cold creeps in like an uninvited guest. You've heard tales of peasants so desperate they burn their own fences. But you're not there yet. Instead, you poke the embers, coaxing the life, and wonder how you'll make it through the night. A modern aside, imagine trying to sleep when your room's colder than your fridge. These folks didn't have fleece pajamas or electric blankets. Just grit and a prayer. Your kids are whining, their noses red as berries, and you shush them with a story about a wolf who got too cold and turned into the north wind. It's a half joke, half lullaby, but it buys you a moment to think. The cold's not just a nuisance. It's a thief, stealing your energy, your food, your hope. Yet peasants survive this, year after year, century after century. How? That's what tonight's about. How you, a shivering nobody in a world without central heating, make it through the darkest, coldest nights. It's not pretty, but there's a quiet stubbornness in it, a kind of resilience that's almost heroic in its ordinariness. You're not fighting dragons or storming castles. You're fighting to wake up tomorrow. So you pull your cloak tighter, nudge your family closer, and settle in. The fire's low, the night's long, and the cold's only getting colder. But you've got a few tricks. Tricks passed down from your parents, your grandparents' parents, and the generations before them. You don't know it yet, but you're tougher than the frost itself. Let's see how you prove it. You're still shivering in that medieval peasant hut, the cold gnawing at your fingers like a hungry dog. The fire's doing its best, but it's more of a suggestion than a solution. Your home, let's be generous and call it that, is a wattle and daub shack, walls patched together with sticks, mud, and hope. The wind sneaks through gaps you stuff with straw, whistling like it's mocking your efforts. You're crouched on the dirt floor, knees pulled up. Try to keep your body heat from escaping into the void. This is your world now. A dim, smoky box where survival feels like a daily bet against the frost. These huts are about as cozy as a wet sock. Picture a single room, maybe 15 by 20 feet if you're lucky, housing your whole family. Parents, kids, maybe a cranky grandparent muttering about the end of days. The walls are thin, slapped together with woven branches, and a clay straw mix that cracks when the cold gets serious. A mainstream fact. Archaeological digs of medieval peasant homes show they were often built with local materials, designed for quick construction rather than insulation. No fancy stone foundations here, just earth packed hard by generations of feet. The roof's thatch, layered thick to keep out rain, but it's no match for a determined blizzard. Snow drifts into the gaps, dusting your shoulders like some cruel prank from the sky. You glance up at the roof, where a hole lets out smoke from a hearth. If you've got one, not every peasant does. Some make do with a fire pit in the center of the room, the smoke curling up to that hole like it's trying to escape this misery too. The air's thick with it, stinging your eyes, but you don't dare let the fire die. Without it, the cold's got you in checkmate. A quirky tidbit. Some peasants believe smoke purified the air, driving out evil spirits who brought sickness. So you're coughing, but hey, at least the demons are leaving, right? You roll your eyes at the thought, but you're not about to test a theory by dousing the flames. The floor's another problem. It's dirt, maybe covered with rushes or straw if you had time to gather them. You sweep it daily, but it's still a gritty mess, cold as stone under your bare feet. You got no shoes inside. Leather's too precious to waste on indoor shuffling. If you're fancy, you might have a wooden platform for sleeping, raise a few inches off the ground to keep the damp at bay. But most likely, you're on a straw pallet, share with your family, the straw poking through the coarse cloth like it's personally offended by your existence. Historians still argue whether these floors were a health hazard or just an annoyance. Did the damp breed disease, or peasants too busy freezing to notice? Either way, you're not thrilled about lying down tonight. You huddle closer to your spouse, who's muttering about the cow needing more hay. Space is tight. There's no room for sprawling out like a lord in a feather bed. Your kids are curled up nearby, their breath visible in the dim light. Privacy's a fairy tale. You're all in this together, for better or worse. The hut's one room serves as kitchen, bedroom, living space, and occasionally a barn if the weather's bad enough to bring the animals inside. You joke to yourself that at least the cow's farts might warm the place up, but the smell's not worth the trade. The cold's relentless, seeping through every crack, and you're starting to wonder if your bones will ever feel warm again. Let's talk about those walls for a second. They're not just bad at keeping out the cold. They're practically an open invitation. Wattle and dog construction is cheap and quick, but it's not exactly airtight. You've tried patching the gaps with more mud, but it dries and crumbles faster than your hopes for an early spring. Some peasants, you've heard, mix horsehair or even dung into the daub for extra strength. You're not desperate enough for that yet, but give it a week. The wind's howling now, rattling the wooden shutters. If you've got them, most likely, your window is just a hole covered with scrap of cloth, letting in drafts that feel like they're straight from the Arctic. You're not completely helpless, though. You've learned a few tricks to make this hut less of a death trap. You bank the fire with ashes before bed, keeping the embers alive for morning. You stuff rags into the worst cracks, though they're about as effective as a paper shield. If you're clever, you've hung a tattered blanket to block the draft from the door, which is just a rickety slab of wood tied shut with rope. A modern aside. Imagine living in a house with the insulation of a cardboard box, but you can't order takeout to cheer yourself up. These peasants were playing survival on hard mode, and you're right there with them. Your kids are whining again, their teeth chattering like tiny castanets. You pull them closer, tucking their small bodies against yours. Body heat's your secret weapon, but it's a grim one. Everyone's cold, so you're just sharing the misery. You whisper a half-hearted joke about how you're all warmer than the Lord's hunting dogs who sleep in the snow. Nobody laughs, but it's the effort that counts. The truth is, this hut's barely holding together, and neither are you. Every night's a gamble. Will the fire last? Will the roof hold? Will you wake up with all your toes still attached? You don't know it yet, but this flimsy shelter's teaching you something. Resilience isn't about comfort. It's about outlasting the cold one shivering night at a time. The fire pops, sending a spark onto the floor. You stamp it out, heart racing, because a fire is both your savior and your worst enemy. Lose control, and this hut's a tinderbox. You're too tired to dwell on it, though. You just want to make it through the night, to feel your fingers again, to believe spring's not a myth. The cold's got you pinned, but you're a peasant. You're used to being underestimated. You'll find a way to keep going, even if it's just to spite the winter itself. You're still crouched in that drafty hut, the cold sinking deeper into your bones like an unwelcome guest who won't leave. The fire's your only ally now, a flickering patch of warmth in a world that feels like it's trying to freeze you solid. You're hovering over the hearth, hands outstretched, coaxing every scrap of heat from the flames. The logs crackle, spitting sparks that dance like fireflies before they fizzle out on the dirt floor. This fire isn't just light or comfort. It's the heartbeat of your survival, the one thing keeping you from turning into a block of ice. You're a medieval peasant, and this smoky, stubborn blaze is your lifeline to the longest, coldest nights. The heart's the center of your world, a shallow pit or raised stone slab in the middle of the hut. If you're lucky, it's lined with clay to keep the flames from eating your home. You feed it whatever you can scrounge, logs from the Lord's forest if you've risked his wrath, or twigs, and dried dung if you're playing it safe. A mainstream fact. Medieval records show firewood was so scarce for peasants that many relied on common rights to gather fallen branches, but lords often restricted access, fining anyone caught stealing from their woods. You've got a small stack of sticks gathered from a hedge after hours of trudging through snow. It's not enough, but it never is. You ration it like a miser, knowing every log burned is one less for tomorrow. The smoke's another problem. It curls upward, hunting for the hole in the roof, but plenty lingers, stinging your eyes and coating your throat with a gritty taste. You cough, blinking through tears, and joke to yourself that at least the smoke's keeping the rats away. Not that it's true. Those little pests are probably warmer than you, curled up in the thatch. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants believe smoke from certain woods, like hazel, could ward off bad luck or even wolves. You're skeptical, but you toss a hazel twig in anyway, muttering a half-hearted prayer. Better safe than sorry when the wind sounds like a pack of beasts circling your hut. You poke the fire with a stick, coaxing the flames higher. The heat's feeble, barely reaching the edges of the room where your kids are huddled, their faces smudged with soot. You tell them to scoot closer, but not too close. One stray spark, and your straw-strewn floor could turn this place into a bonfire. Fire's a double-edged sword. It's your savior, but it's also a threat. You've heard stories of whole villages lost to a single careless ember. Historians still argue whether peasants were more at risk from freezing or from accidental fires. Both were deadly, but nobody kept a tally of which claimed more lives. You just know you're walking a tightrope, balancing warmth against catastrophe. Let's talk fuel for a second. Wood's a gold standard, but it's not like you've got a forest in your backyard. If you're near a woodland, you might sneak in under cover of darkness, heart pounding, to grab a few branches. Get caught, and the Lord's bailiff will have you fined or worse. So you may do with what's around: dried reeds, hedge trimmings, even an occasional lump of peat if you're near a bog. Peat burns slow and smoky, leaving an earthy smell that clings to your clothes. You joke to your spouse that you're basically cooking the swamp, but they just grunt, too cold to care. A modern aside. Imagine trying to heat your house with nothing but yard clippings and a lighter. These peasants were MacGyvering their way through winter with less. You're not just fighting the cold. You're fighting time. The fire needs constant tending, like a needy child. Let it die and you're done for. Let it grow too big and you're homeless. You've mastered the art of banking it for the night, piling ashes over the embers to keep them smoldering until dawn. It's a small victory, waking to a faint glow instead of a dead hearth. You've also got a trick or two, like wrapping a hot stone from the fire in cloth to tuck against your feet at night. It's not exactly a hot water bottle, but it's better than nothing. You whisper to your kids that it's a fire fairy's gift, and they giggle, distracted from their chattering teeth. The fire's light paints shadows on the walls, turning cracks into looming shapes. You're too practical to believe in ghosts, but the night's long, and the cold makes your mind play tricks. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool scratching your skin, and think about how everything hinges on this fire. Without it, your food stays frozen, your water turns to ice, and your family's huddled misery becomes a death sentence. You're burning through your fuel faster than you'd like, and the pile in the corner looks pitifully small. You've heard of peasants so desperate they burn their own furniture, chairs, stools, even a door frame. You're not there yet, but the thoughts cross your mind, and it's not funny. You lean closer to the flames, feeling the heat kiss your face. It's a fleeting comfort, like a kind word from a stranger. You tell yourself you'll make it through this night, and the next, and the one after that. The fire's your partner in this fight, unreliable but loyal enough. You add another stick, watching it catch, and feel a tiny spark of hope. It's not much, but in this freezing, smoky hut, it's enough to keep you going. You're a peasant, after all. Surviving's what you do, even when the odds are colder than the grave. You're still in that frigid peasant hut, the fire's faint glow doing its best to push back the cold that's settled into your bones like an old grudge. Your eye in the corner where your bed waits, A lumpy straw pallet that's about as inviting as a pile of wet leaves. Your cloak's pulled tight, but it's not enough, so you're thinking about bedding or what passes for it in this world. Blankets? Ha! More like rags stitched together with desperation and prayers. You're a medieval peasant, and staying warm at night means wrapping yourself in whatever scraps you can scrounge, hoping it'll keep the frost from claiming you before dawn. Let's be real. Your bedding situation is grim. You're not curling up under a fluffy duvet or even a proper wool blanket. What you got is a mishmash of coarse cloth patched tunics, and maybe a tattered hide if you're lucky. A mainstream fact. Medieval peasants often use homespun wool or linen for bedding, woven on crude looms and patched until there were more holes in fabric, according to surviving household inventories. These so-called blankets are thin, scratchy, and smell like a mix of sweat and damp dog. You lay them over your straw pallet, which is stuffed with whatever you could gather. Straw, hay, sometimes dried ferns if the harvest was bad. The straw's pokey, jabbing to the cloth like it got a personal vendetta, and it's already starting to rot, giving off a musty whiff that makes you wrinkle your nose. You spread out your bedding, trying to cover yourself and your kids, who are already burrowing into the pallet like mice. The blanket is a patchwork of old tunics and a scrap where you traded a week's worth of eggs for. It's not long enough to cover everyone, so you're playing a losing game of tug-of-war with your spouse. You joke that it's a good thing you're all so skinny. Less body cover, but the kids' chattering teeth kill the mood. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants stuff their bedding with dried beans or grain husks, believing it held heat better. You tried it once, but the crunching kept you awake, and the rats loved it too much. Never again. The cold's relentless, seeping up from the dirt floor and through the flimsy cloth. You layer everything you've got, cloak, spare tunic, even a sack that once held barley. It's not enough, but it's all you have. Historians still argue whether peasants froze more often from poor bedding or from malnutrition, weakening their bodies against the cold. Either way, you're feeling the pinch. Your fingers are stiff, your toes half numb, and the thought of lying down feels like surrendering to the chill. You're tempted to sleep sitting up by the fire, but the smoke's already making your eyes water, and you can't afford to burn more wood. You tuck the kids in first, piling the rags over them. They're small, so they fit under the best patch of cloth. But you and your spouse are left with the frayed edges. You've heard tales of wealthier folk with furs, rabbit, fox, maybe even wolf. But that's as likely as you owning a castle. If you're lucky, you've got a sheepskin greasy and stiff, but it's the warmest thing you own. You drape it over your feet, hoping it'll keep your toes from turning black. A modern aside, imagine trying to sleep under a pile of old clothes and a yoga mat stuffed with grass. That's your 5-star hotel tonight, and there's no room service to complain to. The bedding's not just about warmth. It's about survival. If you don't stay warm enough, you won't wake up, or you'll wake up so weak you can't work. You've seen it happen. A neighbor who didn't layer enough, found stiff as a board come morning. You shake off the thought and pull the rags tighter, the coarse fibers scraping your skin. You joke to yourself that at least the itch keeps you awake enough to know you're still alive. Your spouse grumbles about the draft, and you mutter back that maybe you should both just hibernate like bears. It's a weak laugh, but it's something. Let's talk about maintenance for a second. These blankets don't get washed often, water's too cold, and soap's a luxury. You shake them out, maybe beat them with a stick to knock off the worst of the dirt and bugs. Lice are a constant roommate, and you've made peace with the itching. You've tried airing the bedding in the sun, but winter's short days and endless damp make that a fantasy. Sometimes you burn a sprig of lavender near the pallet, hoping the scent will mask the smell or keep the fleas at bay. It doesn't, but it's a nice thought. You tell your kids it's fairy smoke to make them smile, even if you're rolling your eyes at your own nonsense. The night's closing in, and you're dreading the moment you have to lie down. The pallet's lumpy, the rags are thin, and the cold's waiting to pounce. You're sharing body heat with your family, which helps, but it's like trying to warm a lake with a candle. You're tired, bone tired, but sleep feels like a gamble. You whisper a prayer, half to God, half to the fire, and settle in. The rags shift, leaving a gap where the cold sneaks in, and you curse under your breath. This is your life, fighting for every scrap of warmth, every flicker of hope, in a world that doesn't care if you make it to morning. But you're a peasant, and giving up isn't in your blood. You're still shivering in that drafty hut, the fire's embers barely holding the cold at bay. The straw pallets waiting in your so-called blankets, those patched rags from last section, are about as warm as a broken promise. But you got another trick up your sleeve, one that's less about comfort and more about raw survival. Piling into bed with your entire family. You're a medieval peasant. And tonight, you're squeezing onto that lumpy pallet with your spouse, kids, and maybe a grandparent or two, turning your bed into a human sardine can. It's not cozy. It's cramped, smelly, and full of elbows, but it's how you trap enough body heat to make it through the night. This communal snooze fest is your secret weapon against the frost. Picture it. You're wedged between your spouse, who's muttering about tomorrow's chores, and your youngest, who's already snoring like a tiny bellows. Your older kid sprawled across your legs, and your mother-in-law's claiming half the pallet, her bony knees jabbing your ribs. The pallet's barely big enough, maybe 4 feet wide, stuffed with straw that's gone flat from months of use. You're all tangled under those thin rags, trying to cover every inch of exposed skin. A mainstream fact. Medieval household records show families of 5 or more often shared a single bed, maximizing body heat in unheated homes. It's not about bonding. It's about not freezing to death. The air's thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and damp wool. You're used to it, but it's still a punch to the nose every night. You joke to yourself that you're all just a big, sweaty stew, simmering under the rags to keep the cold out. Your spouse shoots you a look when you chuckle, clearly not in the mood for your nonsense. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants believe sleeping close could transfer strength between family members, like you're all charging each other's batteries. You're not sure about that, but you'll take any warmth you can get, even if it comes with your kid's foot in your face. Let's talk logistics. Getting everyone settled is like choreographing a wrestling match in slow motion. You nudge your youngest closer to the center, where it's warmest, and try to drape the best scrap of cloth over them. Your spouse is hogging the sheepskin, and you're too tired to argue. The pallet creaks under the weight of everyone, and the straw shifts, leaving you on a hard patch of dirt. You're half sitting, half lying, because there's no room to stretch out. Historians still argue whether this cramped sleeping helped or hurt. Did the shared warmth save lives, or did the lack of space and constant jostling make sleep a nightmare? You're leaning toward nightmare, especially when your mother-in-law starts muttering about demons again. The cold's still there, creeping through the gaps in your rags and the cracks in the hut's walls. You can feel it on your back, where the pallet meets the floor, like an icy hand pressing against you. But the body heat's doing something. Your fingers aren't as numb, and your kid's shivers have slowed. You pull them closer, their small bodies warm against yours, and try to ignore the ache in your shoulder from lying on a lump of straw. A modern aside. Imagine cramming your whole family onto a twin mattress with nothing but a couple of old towels for cover. That's your reality, and there's no hitting snooze to escape it. You're not just sharing warmth. You're sharing everything. Snores, coughs, the occasional fart that makes you grimace, and your kids giggle. Privacy's a myth. You're all in each other's business, all the time. You've heard of wealthier folk with curtained beds, or even separate rooms, and you snore at the thought. Must be nice. Here, it's all about survival, and survival means sticking together, literally. You whisper to your youngest that you're all like a pack of wolves, huddling for warmth. It's a weak joke, but it gets a sleepy smile, and that's enough to keep you going. There's a rhythm to this chaos. You've done it every night since winter set in, and you've got it down to science. The kids go in the middle, where it's safest. You and your spouse take the edges, shielding them from the drafts. Your mother-in-law gets a spot by the wall because she claims it's holier there, whatever that means. You've stopped arguing with her. It's not worth the energy. The rags get draped strategically, and you all shift until you're a single, breathing unit, stealing heat from each other like thieves. You joke that if you get any closer, you'll all meld into one giant peasant blob. Nobody laughs, but it's the thought that counts. The night drags on and the cold keeps pushing, but you're holding it off, just barely. Your family's warmth is a fragile shield, but it's enough to keep your heart beating. You're tired, your back's screaming, and someone's elbow is definitely in your ribs, but you're alive. That's what matters. You're a peasant, and this crowded, uncomfortable pile is your defiance against winter's grip. You close your eyes, listening to the soft snores around you, and let the shared heat pull you toward sleep. Tomorrow's another fight, but for now, you're winning. You're still crammed onto that lumpy straw pallet. Your family's body heat, the only thing keeping the cold from turning you into a human popsicle. The hut's walls creak under the wind's assault, and the fire's down to a faint glow, barely enough to see your own breath clouding the air. You're hungry, always hungry, but winter's made it worse, and your stomach's growling like a cranky dog. Tonight, you're banking on a bowl of warm gruel to fight the frost from the inside out. As a medieval peasant, food's not just fuel. It's a lifeline, a flicker of warmth in a world that's trying to freeze you solid. Let's set the scene. Your kitchen is a corner of the hut, a clay pot simmering over the fire's embers. Supper's nothing fancy, gruel, a watery mix of barley or oats, maybe some dried peas if you're lucky. A mainstream fact, medieval peasants got about 70% of their calories from grain-based foods like gruel or bread, according to manor records. But in winter, stores dwindle and you're rationing every spoonful. You stir the pot, the steam rising like a ghost, and scoop out portions for your family. It's thin, lumpy, and tastes like sadness, but it's hot, and that's what counts. You joke to your kids that it's king's porridge, and they roll their eyes. Smart kids. The gruel's warmth spreads through your chest, a small rebellion against the cold. You're sitting cross-legged on the floor, bowl cradled in your hands, savoring every sip. Your spouse is slurping theirs, and your youngest is making a mess, as usual. You've added a pinch of salt, pure luxury, and maybe a wilted onion for flavor, but that's as gourmet as it gets. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants swore by tossing in a handful of nettles, claiming they warmed the blood. You tried it once, and it was like eating a hedge, but you're desperate enough to consider it again. Anything to feel less like a block of ice. Food scarce this time of year. The harvest long gone, and your grain sacks looking thinner than your patience. You're down to the dregs, barley with weevils you pretend not to see. You tell yourself they're just extra crunch, but your stomach churns at the thought. Historians still argue whether winter starvation was more deadly than the cold itself. Did hunger weaken peasants so much they couldn't fight the frost, or was it the other way around? Either way, you're feeling both, and it's a lousy combo. You ration the gruel carefully, making sure the kids get enough to stop their whining, even if it means you go to bed hungrier. Let's talk about cooking for a second. Your fire's not exactly a stovetop. You're balancing the pot on a tripod of stones, praying it doesn't tip into the ashes. Water's from a village well, half frozen, and hauled in a bucket that's heavier than your dreams. You got no spices, no butter, no sugar. Those are for lords and their ilk. If you're lucky, you got a scrap of dried fish or bacon fat to toss in. But that's a once-a-month treat. A modern aside. Imagine trying to cook a meal with nothing but a campfire and a pot, while your fridge is empty and the grocery store's a fantasy. These peasants were making do with less than a camping trip's worth of gear. You're not just eating to fill your belly. You're eating to stay warm. A hot meal raises your core temperature, gives you a fighting chance against the chill. You've learned to time it right. Eat just before bed, and the warmth lingers, helping you drift off before the cold creeps back. You've heard of peasants so desperate they boiled leather shoes for broth. You're not there yet, but the thoughts cross your mind, and it's not as funny as you wish it was. You tell your spouse you'd rather eat the cow's tail than your boots, and they snort, which is as close to a laugh as you'll get tonight. The kids are scraping their bowls clean, licking their fingers like it's a feast. You're proud of them for not complaining, even if the gruel's more water than grain. You got a trick or two to stretch the food, mixing some ground acorns or dried herbs to make it feel heartier. It's not much, but it keeps the hunger at bay, at least for a few hours. You're always thinking about the next meal, the next sack of grain, the next harvest that's months away. Winter's a thief, stealing your stores faster than you can replenish them. But you're stubborn. You've made it this far, haven't you? You finish your gruel, the warmth fading too fast. The pot's empty and the fire's dying, but you're not done fighting. You tuck the kids in, their bellies full enough to keep them quiet, and pull the rags over you all. The cold's waiting, but that hot meal's giving you a spark of strength. You're a peasant, and you've learned to cling to every scrap of warmth, whether from a fire, a body, or a bowl of watery gruel. You close your eyes, stomach still rumbling, and tell yourself tomorrow's another day to outsmart the frost. You're still huddled in that drafty hut, the faint warmth from last night's gruel already a distant memory as the cold clamps down like a miser's fist. The straw pallets a tangle of limbs, your family pressed close to steal every bit of body heat. But there's another source of warmth in this freezing shack, one that's snorting and shuffling in the corner. Your animals. As a medieval peasant, you're not too proud to cuddle up with your livestock, cows, goats, maybe a few chickens, for a fuzzy, smelly boost of heat. It's not exactly a cozy petting zoo, but when the frost's trying to kill you, you'll take any warmth you can get, even if it comes with a side of manure. Picture the scene. Your hut's a one-room wonder, and the animals aren't banished to a fancy barn. They're right here, sharing your space, their breath steaming in the dim light. There's a cow tethered by the wall, chewing cud like it's judging your life choices, and a couple of goats bleating softly. The chickens are scrabbling in the straw, probably plotting their escape. You've got them inside because the snow's piled high, and leaving them out means losing them to the cold or a hungry fox. A mainstream fact. Medieval peasants often kept livestock indoors during winter, as archaeological evidence of animal bones and dung in house floors confirms. It's practical, keeps them alive, and doubles as a living furnace. You shuffle closer to cow, its bulk radiating heat like a furry radiator. It's not cuddly, its hide's coarse, and it smells like a mix of wet hay and regret, but you're not picky. You drape a rag over your shoulders and lean against it, feeling the warmth seep into your side. Your kids are already nestled against the goats, their small hands buried in the animal's scruffy fur. You joke that the cow's your new best friend, but your spouse just grumbles, probably jealous of the cow's body heat. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants believe sleeping near animals protected against evil spirits, like the livestock snore scared off demons. You're not sold on that, but you'll take the warmth and call it a win. The downside? It's a stench fest. The hut's already ripe with smoke and unwashed bodies, and now you've added a barnyard bouquet. The cow's droppings are a constant chore, and the goats keep nibbling your straw pallet like it's a buffet. You've tried shooing them away, but they're as stubborn as you are. Historians still argue whether keeping animals indoors was a health risk or a necessity. Did the warmth outweigh the disease spread by fleas and filth? You're too cold to care about theory. You just want to stop shivering. You scoop up a chicken, tucking it under your arm for extra warmth, and ignore its indignant cluck. At least it's not pecking you. Yet, let's talk logistics. The animals aren't just heaters, they're your livelihood. That cow's milk is your protein, the goat's too, and the chicken's eggs are gold when food's scarce. You can't afford to let them freeze, so you've rigged a corner with straw and a rickety partition to keep them from wandering into the fire. You're burning extra fuel to keep them comfortable, which stings when your woodpile's shrinking. A modern aside, imagine sharing your living room with a cow and a flock of chickens. No air freshener in sight. These peasants were living a survival reality show, and you're a reluctant contestant. You're not thrilled about the mess, but you've got tricks to make it work. You sweep the dung into a pile to deal with later. Maybe it'll dry and burn for extra fuel. You've heard of peasants using animal fat to make crude candles, and you're tempted to try it, but you'd rather keep the cow alive. You tell your kids to stop teasing the goats, who are headbutting anything that moves. To lighten the mood, you spin a tale about a magical cow that farts warmth and your youngest giggles, though your spouse shoots you a look that says, "Really?" It's a small victory in a night that feels like a losing battle. The animals aren't just warmth. They're a reminder of why you're fighting. Lose them, and you lose your milk, eggs, and maybe your plow team come spring. You pat the cow's flank, muttering a thanks for its heat, and settle back onto the pallet. Your family's still crammed together, now with a goat's head resting on your leg. It's chaotic, smelly, and far from comfortable, but it's working. The cold's still there, lurking like a thief, but the animal's warmth is holding it off, just enough. You're a peasant, and you've learned to make allies out of necessity, even if they moo and cluck through the night. You close your eyes. The cow's steady breathing a strange kind of lullaby. The hut's a mess. Your nose is protesting. But you're warmer than you were an hour ago. Tomorrow, you'll deal with the dung and the drafts, but for now, you're surviving one fuzzy heater at a time. You're tougher than the frost, and you got a cow to prove it. You're still in that freezing hut. The cow's warmth and your family's cramped huddle keeping you just on the right side of frostbite. The fire's down to embers, and the animals are snuffling in the corner, but sleep's a luxury you can't afford for long. Dawn's creeping in, gray and grudging, and as a medieval peasant, you got work to do, winter or no winter. The cold's biting at your heels, but chores don't wait, and you're trudging through snow for backbreaking tasks that make your modern self wince. Survival's not just about staying warm. It's about keeping the whole operation, your family, animals, and meager supplies, going no matter how much the frost tries to grind you down. You pull on your tattered boots, the leather stiff as a board, and step outside into a world of white. The snow's ankle deep, crunching underfoot like it's mocking your effort. Your breath clouds the air, and your fingers ache just holding the bucket for fetching water. A mainstream fact. Medieval peasants worked year-round, with winter tasks like repairing tools, tending livestock, and hauling wood, as surviving manor records detailed daily labor obligations to lords. Your day's packed. Feed the animals, clear snow from the path, maybe sneak into the Lord's forest for kindling if you're feeling bold. You're not paid for this. It's just life, and slacking means starving. The cold makes every job harder. You're hauling water from the village well, the bucket's rim icy against your palms. The well's half frozen, and you're chipping at it with a stick, cursing under your breath. You joke to yourself that the well's got a better social life than you, seeing everyone in the village daily. Back at the hut, the cow needs hay, the goats need checking, and the chickens are squawking like they're staging a protest. You're also mending a broken fence before the Lord's bailiff notices and fines you. A quirky tidbit. Some peasants believed rubbing snow on tools kept them strong for spring planting. You tried it once, and all you got was wet gloves and a rusty hoe. Never again. Your body's screaming, back aching, hands numb, but stopping's not an option. The snow's piling up, and you're clearing a path to the shed with a shovel that's more splinters than wood. Historians still argue whether winter work was more exhausting than summer's long days. Did the cold sap your strength faster, or was a shorter daylight a mercy? You're too busy to care, but you're leaning toward exhausting. Your kids are supposed to help, but they're dawdling, throwing snow at each other. You bark at them to fetch kindling, then soften it with a grin, saying it's training for the king's army. They laugh, but you're half serious. Work's all they gotta learn. Let's talk about the Lord's cut for a second. You're not just working for yourself. You owe labor to the manor. That means trudging through snow to fix the Lord's barn or clear his roads, all while your own chores pile up. If you're lucky, you get a day off to tend your own plot, but luck's in short supply. A modern aside. Imagine working a full shift in sub-zero weather, no coffee break, no union, just a boss who'd rather see you dead than idle. These peasants were tougher than your average gym bro, and you're feeling every ounce of their grind. You're back at the hut now, arms full of damp kindling that's barely worth burning. Your fingers are red, stinging like they've been slapped, and you're dreaming of the fire's warmth, even if it's smoky and weak. You've got to check the grain sack, too. Rats are bolder in winter, and you're not above setting a trap with a crumb of gruel. You tell your spouse you're one step away from arm wrestling the rats for dinner, and they snort, which is as good as a laugh these days. The kids are finally helping, stacking sticks by the hearth, and you're proud of their effort, even if it's slow. The cold's not just physical, it's mental. Every task feels heavier when your toes are numb and your stomach's rumbling. You're always calculating. How much wood's left, how long the grain will last, how many days until spring. You've heard of peasants who gave up, who let the cold win. But that's not you. You're stubborn, forged by winter's past, and you'll keep moving, even if it's just to spite the snow. You stamp your feet, shake off the flakes, and head back out for another load. Survival's a marathon, and you're not sprinting. You're slogging one frozen step at a time. You're back outside now, the wind cutting through your cloak like it's got a personal grudge. The day's not done, and neither are you. You're a peasant, and winter worked your reality check. No rest, no warmth, just a grind. But you got your family, your animals, and a stubborn streak wider than the frozen river. You'll make it through, even if it's just to prove you can. You're back in that icy hut, the cold still gnawing at you like a dog with a bone, even after a day of hauling wood and wrestling with frozen buckets. The fire's flickering. Your family's huddled close, and the animals are snuffling in their corner, adding their funky warmth to the mix. But winter's not just a physical fight. It's a mind game, and as a medieval peasant, you're leaning on superstitions to keep the darkness and frost at bay. You're whispering charms, hanging herbs, and maybe tossing a pebble at the door to scare off whatever's lurking in the night. It's not just about warmth. It's about convincing yourself the cold won't win, even when it feels like it might. The night's long, and the shadows on the hut's walls look like they're up to no good. You're practical, but you're not immune to the stories your grandmother told. Tales of winter spirits who steal breath or frost fairies who nip at your toes. You're muttering a charm under your breath, something about keeping the ice wraiths away. A mainstream fact. Medieval peasants often relied on oral traditions of charms and rituals, as documented in later church records, to protect against natural and supernatural threats. You got a sprig of holly hung above the door, prickly and faded, but it's supposed to ward off evil. You're not sure you believe it, but it's better than nothing. You sprinkle a pinch of salt into the fire, watching it spark blue. The kids are wide-eyed, thinking it's magic, and you lean into it, whispering that it's a fire blessing to keep the hut safe. They giggle and you hide a smirk. Parenting win. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants believe burying a stone under the hearth could anchor the house against winter's wrath, like it's a ship in a storm. You tried it last year, digging up a smooth river rock and tucking it under the fire pit. The cold still came, but you're not digging it up. Why tempt fate? The village is full of these rituals. Your neighbor swears by tying a red thread around her wrist to bind the warmth to her body. You're skeptical, but you've got a scrap of red cloth tucked in your pocket, just in case. There's also the old man down the lane who insists on spitting into the snow to curse the frost. You've seen him do it, and you're not sure if it's magic or just gross. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were a psychological crutch or a genuine belief system. Did peasants really think charms worked, or were they just hedging their bets? You're leaning toward hedging, but you're still muttering that charm, your voice low, so the kids don't hear the doubt. Let's talk about the rituals for a second. You've got a routine. Before bed, you walk the hut's perimeter, tapping the walls and whispering a prayer to St. Cuthbert, patron of the North, to keep the cold at bay. It's half habit, half hope, and it makes your spouse roll their eyes. You also keep a dried apple by the hearth, a nod to a story about fruit warding off hunger demons. It's probably nonsense, but it reminds you of autumn's bounty, and that's enough. A modern aside, imagine sprinkling salt around your apartment to keep out bad vibes, only it's not vibes. It's sub-zero temperatures and the fear you won't wake up. These peasants were clutching at straws, and you're right there with them. You're not just warding off spirits, you're fighting fear. Winter's long, and the cold makes every creak sound like doom. You tell your kids a story about a frost giant who got lost in his own blizzard, hoping it'll make them laugh instead of shiver. It works, mostly, though your youngest still clings to you like you're a human shield. You joke that if the giant shows up, you'll bribe him with the cow's milk. Your spouse snorts, and you count as a win. The charms and stories are flimsy, but they give you something to hold on to when the wind's howling and the fire's too weak. The truth is, these superstitions are as much for you as for the kids. You're tired, hungry, and colder than you've ever been, but whispering a charm or hanging a sprig of holly feels like fighting back. You're not just a peasant. You're a warrior against the unseen, armed with nothing but words and a stubborn streak. You check the holly above the door one last time, muttering another prayer, and settle back onto the pallet. The cold's still there, but you've got your charms, your family, and a flicker of belief that you'll outlast it. You're not sure if it's magic or just grit, but you're betting on both. You're still shivering in that drafty hut, the holly sprig above the door swaying slightly as the wind sneaks through the cracks. Your family's piled onto the straw pallet. The animals are snuffling in their corner, and your whispered charms from last night are still lingering in your mind, offering a flicker of comfort against the cold. But winter's not just about staying warm. It's about staying alive, and right now, your toes are tingling in a way that's got you worried. Frostbite's a real threat, and as a medieval peasant, you're turning to folk remedies that sound more like witchcraft than medicine. You're rubbing your feet with snow and slathering them with questionable concoctions, hoping to keep the cold from claiming your digits. The fire's low, barely enough to warm your hands, and you're inspecting your feet by its dim glow. They're red, swollen, and one toe's gone worryingly numb. Frostbite's no joke. Lose a toe, and you're hobbling through spring planting, assuming you make it that far. A mainstream fact. Medieval medical texts, like those from monastic hospitals, describe frostbite as a common winter ailment for peasants, treated with warming salves and prayers. You're no monk, so you're relying on what your grandmother taught you. Rub the frostbitten skin with snow to wake it up, then smear it with a mix of goose fat and herbs. It smells like a barn and feels like defeat, but you're desperate. You grab a handful of snow from just outside the door, wincing as it stings your hands, and massage it into your toes. It's counterintuitive, cold to fight cold, but the old folks swear it brings the blood back. Then comes the goose fat, rancid and slimy, mixed with crushed mint you dried last summer. You slather it on, gagging at the smell, and wrap your feet in rags. Your kids are watching wide-eyed, and you joke that you're turning into a greasy troll to make them giggle. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants believe rubbing frostbite with a turnip, yes, a turnip, could draw out the cold. You tried it once, and all you got was a sticky foot and a hungry rat. Never again. The remedies are a gamble. Your neighbor swears by soaking frostbitten skin in warm ale, but you're not wasting good drink on your feet. Another villager insists on chanting over the injury while holding a hot stone. You're skeptical, but you've seen worse ideas, like the guy who tried to burn the frost out with a candle and ended up with blisters. Historians still argue whether these folk remedies did more harm than good. Did they actually restore circulation, or were peasants just throwing darts at a board? You're leaning toward darts, but you're still rubbing that goose fat, hoping for a miracle. Let's talk about the stakes for a second. Frostbite isn't just pain. It's a threat to your survival. If your toes turn black, you're done. No amputation clinics in this village. Just a knife and a prayer if it gets bad. You've seen it happen. A neighbor who lost fingers to the cold, now struggling to hold a plow. You're checking your kids' hands and feet, too, making sure their rags are tight and their noses aren't too red. A modern aside. Imagine treating a serious injury with nothing but kitchen scraps and superstition. No doctor, no WebMD. Just you and a pot of questionable goo. These peasants were playing doctor with zero training. And you're right there with them. You're not just fighting frostbite. You're fighting fear. Every tingle in your fingers feels like a warning, and the cold's always waiting to pounce. You tell your spouse you're one step away from turning into an icicle, and they grunt, too busy rubbing their own hands to laugh. To keep the kids calm, you spin a story about a frost fairy who only bites lazy toes. So they'd better keep wiggling. They giggle, but you're watching their feet like a hawk. You got another trick. Tucking warm stones from the fire into their rags at night, hoping it'll keep the blood flowing. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. The hut's still freezing, the wind whistling through the gaps like it's mocking your efforts. You're tired. Your feet are greasy and the coal's not letting up, but you're not giving in. You rewrap your toes, muttering a prayer to St. Agatha, who's supposed to protect against injury. The goose fat's probably nonsense, but it's keeping your hope alive, and that's half the battle. You're a peasant, and you've learned to fight with whatever's at hand. Snow, fat, or sheer stubbornness. You settle back onto the pallet, your family clothes, and tell yourself you'll keep all your toes, if only to spite the winter. You're still holed up in that icy hut. The goose fat on your toes doing its dubious work while the cold keeps pressing in like an overeager guest. Your family's huddled on a straw pallet. The animals are snorting in their corner, and the fire's barely holding its own against the frost. You've got your charms and your greasy remedies, but sometimes survival means getting out of this cramped, smoky box. Tonight, you're trudging through the snow to the village's heart, a neighbor's hut, where folks gather around a shared hearth to swap stories, thaw their bones, and pretend winter's not winning. As a medieval peasant, these fireside gatherings are your lifeline, a chance to steal warmth and sanity in a world that's all ice and hunger. The village is quiet, blanketed in snow, the stars above sharp as needles. You wrap your cloak tight, remember that threadbare thing, and slog through the drifts, your kids trailing behind, whining about the cold. Your neighbor's hut is bigger, maybe a touch less drafty, with a hearth that's roaring thanks to a communal woodpile. You step inside, and the warmth hits you like a hug, though the air is thick with smoke and the smell of too many bodies. A mainstream fact: medieval villages often shared resources in winter, with manor records noting communal gatherings to conserve fuel and boost morale. You're not here just for heat. You're here for the stories, the gossip, the reminder you're not alone in this frozen fight. Everyone's crowded around the fire. Old men, young mothers, kids poking each other with sticks. You squeeze in, feeling the flames kiss your face, and pass around a loaf of coarse bread someone baked. You tear off a piece, savoring the chew, and joke that it's Lord's bread compared to your usual gruel. The kids giggle, and even your spouse cracks a smile. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villagers believe telling tales by the fire could weaken winter's grip, like words had power to melt snow. You're not buying it, but you're happy to listen to old Agnes spin a yarn about a wolf who outsmarted a blizzard, if only to get your numb toes for a bit. The stories are a mix of truth and nonsense. There's talk of last year's harvest, the Lord's latest tax, and a wild tale about a ghost in the woods. You chime in with a story about a fox stealing your eggs, embellishing it to make the kids laugh. The fire's crackling, and the room's alive with voices gruff, tired, but warm. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were more about survival or community. Did the shared warmth save lives, or was it the social bond that kept despair at bay? You're leaning toward both, especially when Agnes offers you a sip of her ale. It's weak, but it's warm and you'll take it. Let's talk about the setup for a second. These gatherings aren't planned. They just happen. Someone's at a bigger fire, a bit more wood, and word spreads. You're all pitching in. Your family brought a few sticks. Another brought a turnip to roast. It's not a party. It's a pact. You're sharing heat, food, and stories to outlast the cold. A modern aside. Imagine cramming into a neighbor's basement during a power outage, everyone bringing a candle or a snack, telling stories to keep the dark at bay. These peasants were building community with nothing but a fire and some tall tales, and you're right there with them. The kids are engrossed, listening to a story about a saint who tamed a snowstorm. You're half listening, half watching the fire, grateful for its heat. You're tired, your back's aching from the day's chores, but this moment feels like a breather. You joke to the group that if the saint shows up, you'll ask him to fix your leaky roof. Someone chuckles, and it's a small win. The stories keep coming. Tales of heroes, warnings about spirits, and a heated debate about whose cow gives better milk. You're not solving the world's problems, but you're warm, and that's enough for now. The night's wearing on, and the fire's starting to dip. You're dreading the walk back to your hut, but you're stronger for this. Fed, warmed, and reminded you're part of something bigger. You pull your kids close, their cheeks flush from the fire, and head out into the snow. The cold hits hard, but you're carrying a spark of hope from that hearthside. You're a peasant, and these gatherings are your rebellion against winter's grip. A reminder that warmth isn't just fire. It's people, stories, and the will to keep going. You're trudging back from the neighbor's hearthside gathering, the warmth of their fire already fading as the cold sinks its teeth into you again. Your kids are dragging their feet, whining about the snow, and your cloak, remember that tattered rag, is doing a lousy job of keeping the wind out. As a medieval peasant, your clothing is your first line of defense against the frost, but it's about as effective as a paper shield. You're layering every scrap of wool and linen you own, hoping to trap enough warmth to make it through the night. It's not fashion, it's survival, and you're fighting a losing battle with threadbare tunics and a stubborn streak. Your outfit's a patchwork of misery. You got a wool tunic, patched so many times it's more darn than original cloth, and a pair of rough hose that itch like they're plotting revenge. Over that, your cloak's a sad mix of wool and hope, frayed at the edges and heavy with damp. A mainstream fact. Medieval peasants wore layered wool and linen, often homespun and repaired endlessly, as clothing inventory from manor records show. Wool's your best bet. It traps heat even when wet, but yours is thin, worn out from years of use. You've got no gloves, so your hands are stuffed in your sleeves, and your boots are leather scraps tied with cord, leaking snow with every step. You're piling on layers like you're building a fortress. Under the tunic, you've got a linen shift, stiff with dirt because washing's a summer luxury. You've added a second tunic, one you stole from your spouse when they weren't looking, and a scrap of cloth wrapped around your neck like a scarf. Your kids are bundled in similar rags, their small faces barely visible under hoods. You joke that you all look like walking laundry piles, but the wind's too sharp for anyone to laugh. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants stuff their clothes with straw for extra insulation, like human scarecrows. You tried it once, but the rustling kept you awake, and the rats thought it was an invitation. The cold's relentless, slicing through your layers like they're nothing. You're stomping your feet to keep the blood moving, but your toes are tingling, and you're praying frostbite. Remember that goose fat? Doesn't come for you again. Historians still argue whether clothing or shelter was a bigger failure in keeping peasants warm. Did flimsy tunics doom them, or was it the drafty huts? You're betting on both, especially when a gust sneaks on your cloak and makes you curse the day you were born. Your spouse mutters about needing a new cloak, and you snap back that you'll trade the cow for one. Empty threat, but it feels good to say. Let's talk about upkeep for a second. Your clothes are a nightmare to maintain. No washing machine, no dry cleaner, just a bucket of icy water in your raw hands if you're desperate. Mostly, you beat the dirt out with a stick and pray the stains don't show. Mending's a constant chore. You're stitching patches with a bone needle, using thread you unravel from an old sack. A modern aside. Imagine wearing the same sweater every day for a year, no laundry, just you and a needle fighting holes like they're the enemy. These peasants were tailors out of necessity, and you're no exception. Sewing by firelight until your eyes ache. You're back in the hut now, shaking snow off your cloak. The kids are peeling off their outer layers, whining about the itch, and you're checking their tunics for new tears. You got a trick or two. Rubbing tallow into the leather boots to keep them from cracking, or tying rags around your hands for makeshift mittens. You tell your youngest they're knight's gloves, and they puff up with pride, even if the rags are more whole than cloth. It's a small win, but you'll take it. The cold's still winning, though, creeping through your layers like it's got a personal grudge. Your clothing's not just about warmth. It's about dignity. You're no lord, but you're not a beggar either, and you'll be damned if you let the frost strip you bare. You're layering, patching, and praying, knowing every stitch is a defiance against winter's bite. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling the wind sting, and settle by the fire. The kids are bundled. Your spouse is grumbling, and you're all still here, still fighting. You're a peasant, and your thin, tattered defenses all you've got, but it's enough to keep you going, one shivering step at a time. You're back in that freezing hut, your tattered cloak and patched tunics, those flimsy defenses from last night, barely holding off the cold that's clawing at you. The fire's down to a sullen glow. Your family's huddled on the straw pallet, and the animals are snuffling in their corner, adding their musky heat. But today, you're not just fighting the frost with rags and gruel. You're seeking a different kind of warmth, spiritual and physical, at the village church. As a medieval peasant, the church is your refuge, a place to warm your soul and maybe your toes, even if it comes with a side of stern sermons about your sinful ways. You trudge through the snow, your kids trailing behind, their noses red as berries. The church is a stone's throw from your hut, its squat walls and wooden roof the sturdiest building in the village. Inside, it's not exactly toasty, but it's better than your leaky shack. The air smells of incense and damp wool, and the flickering candles cast shadows on the rough walls. A mainstream fact. Medieval churches were central to village life, serving as both spiritual and social hubs, with records showing peasants attended Mass regularly, especially in winter for communal warmth. You're here for the priest's blessing, sure, but also for the chance to sit still in a room that's not actively trying to freeze you. You shuffle into a pew, well, a wooden bench that creaks under your weight, and pull your cloak tight. The priest's droning about hellfire, which is honestly sounding pretty appealing right now. Your kids are fidgeting, and you hush them with a glare, promising a story later if they behave. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants believe sitting near the altar could borrow its holiness to keep winter's evils at bay, like a spiritual space heater. You're not sure about that, but you inch closer anyway, hoping the candle's glow might warm your hands. You joke to yourself that if hell's as warm as the priest says, you might book a one-way ticket. The church isn't just about prayers. It's a break from the grind. The stone walls block the wind better than your hut's wattle and daub, and the crowd, half the village crammed in, adds body heat. You spot your neighbor from the hearthside gathering, nodding off during the sermon, and stifle a grin. The priest's warning about sloth feels personal, but you're too cold to care. Historians still argue whether churches were more about salvation or survival in winter. Did peasants flock for faith, or was it the promise of a warmer room? You're here for both, especially when the priest passes around a blessed loaf, and you snag a crumb for each kid. It's not much, but it's something. Let's talk about the vibe for a second. The church is a mix of solemn and social. You're kneeling, muttering prayers, but you're also catching up on gossip. Whispered, of course, so the priest doesn't glare. Someone's cow died, another's wife is sick, and there's talk of a wolf in the woods. You share a quick story about your own cow. Remember that fuzzy heater? And how it nearly kicked over fire. The kids giggle, and you feel a spark of warmth that's not just from the candles. A modern aside. Imagine piling into a drafty community center during a blizzard, half for the sermon, half for the free coffee and company. These peasants were chasing hope in a stone box, and you're right there with them. The sermons aren't all comfort. The priest's hammering on about preparing for death, which isn't exactly uplifting when your toes are numb. You're supposed to confess your sins, but you're too busy praying for an early spring. You got a trick. Slipping a small stone into your pocket, warmed by the candle you lit for a penny's offering. It's not stealing if it's for survival, right? You tell your kids it's a saint stone to keep them warm, and they clutch theirs like treasure. It's a small lie, but it keeps them quiet, and you're calling it a win. The service ends, and you linger, soaking up the last of the church's warmth. The crowd thins, but you're not ready to face the snow again. You're stronger for this, not just from the heat, but from the prayers, the shared bread, the sense you're not alone. You're a peasant, and the church is your anchor, a place where the cold feels a little less cruel. You step back into the wind, clutching your stone, and tell yourself you'll make it through one whispered prayer at a time. You're trudging back from the church, that fleeting warmth from the candles and crowd already slipping away as the wind slices through your tattered cloak. Yep, the same one that's been failing you all winter. Your kids are whining, their saint stones clutched tight, and the snow's piling up like it got a personal vendetta. The hut's waiting, smoky and cold, with its straw pallet and snuffling animals. As a medieval peasant, you're clinging to a distant hope, spring's promise, a whisper of green fields and warmer days. Winter's dragging on, but you're dreaming of a thaw, even if it feels like chasing a mirage in this frozen world. The village is a sea of white, the path to your hut barely visible under fresh snow. You're squinting at the horizon, where the sun's a weak smear behind gray clouds, offering no heat, just a reminder that time's crawling. Your breath clouds the air, and your fingers ache inside your rag-wrapped hands. A mainstream fact. Medieval calendars, like those in church almanacs, mark spring start around March, but Treering data shows winters often lingered, delaying planting and stretching food shortages. You're counting the days, knowing your grain sack. Remember those weevil-riddled dregs. Won't last much longer. Spring's your lifeline, but it's still weeks away, maybe months. You kick through the snow, muttering about warmer days when you can plant barley and feel the sun on your face. Your kids are dragging, so you spin a tale about a spring fairy who melts snow with her laughter. They giggle, and you hide a smile, even if your heart's heavy. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants believe tying a green ribbon to a tree could call spring early, like a magical SOS. You've got no ribbon, but you've tied a scrap of cloth to a bare branch near your hut, just in case. It's probably nonsense, but it's a spark of hope, and you're clutching it tight. The cold's not just physical. It's a weight on your mind. Every day feels the same: snow, hunger, work. And you're starting to wonder if winter's eternal. You heard stories of springs that never came, of villages buried under endless frost. Historians still argue whether hope or desperation drove peasants through late winters. Did they really believe in spring, or were they just too stubborn to quit? You're leaning towards stubborn, especially when you check the grain sack and find it lighter than yesterday. You joke to your spouse that you'll start eating snow if the barley runs out, but their grim nod kills the mood. Let's talk about survival for a second. You're rationing everything: food, wood, even hope. You're saving the last of your dried peas for a feast when the first green shoot appears. You're also keeping the animals fed. Remember that cow? Because their milk's your backup plan. You got a trick: burying a few turnips in the dirt floor to keep them from freezing. A secret stash for when things get dire. A modern aside: imagine staring at an empty pantry, knowing the grocery store's closed for months, and your only plan is hoping the weather changes. These peasants were betting on a season they couldn't see, and you're right there, squinting for signs of a thaw. You're back in the hut now, shaking snow off your boots. The kids are piling onto the pallet, and you're checking the fire, praying it holds through the night. You tell them spring's coming, that the fields will bloom, and you'll all eat fresh bread again. It's half a lie. You're not sure, but they nod, sleepy and trusting. You're tired, bone-deep tired, but the thought of spring keeps you moving. You survived this long, through frostbite, hunger, and endless chores. You're a peasant, and spring's your finish line, even if it's still out of sight. You pull the rags over your family, whisper a prayer for warmth, and hold on to that green ribbon hope, stubborn as ever. You're still in that icy hut, the wind howling outside like it's got a score to settle, while your family huddles on the straw pallet, wrapped in those threadbare rags you've been wrestling with all winter. The fire's a faint glow, the animals are snuffling in their corner, and your green ribbon hope for spring, tied to that branch outside, is feeling more like a taunt than a promise. As a medieval peasant, you fought through frost, hunger, and endless chores, and somehow you're still here, snoring to the coldest nights. This is it, the final stretch, where you reflect on the resilience that's carried you this far. As winter's grip starts to loosen, just a whisper, and you dare to believe you've won. You're crouched by the hearth, poking the embers to coax out one last spark of warmth. Your kids are curled up, their breaths slow and steady, and your spouse is muttering about the cow's milk yield. The hut's still cold, but there's a shift in the air, a faint softness, like the wind's getting tired of its own tantrum. A mainstream fact: medieval peasants survived winters through sheer endurance, with village records showing most families made it to spring, though often weaker and hungrier. You're one of them, battered but breathing, your toes still attached, thanks to that greasy goose fat, and your grain sack holding out, barely. You're not celebrating yet, but you're starting to think you might just make it. You glance at the door, where a sliver of light sneaks through. It's not much, but it's brighter than yesterday, and you're clinging to that like a lifeline. You tell your kids a story about a farmer who outsmarted winter by planting hope in the snow, and they smile, half asleep. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants believe snoring loudly could scare winter away, like a battle cry against the frost. You're not sure about that, but your spouse's snores are giving a solid try, and you chuckle, keeping it quiet so you don't wake the kids. Historians still argue whether this resilience was born of faith, community, or just raw stubbornness. Did peasants survive because they believed in spring, or because they refused to die? You're betting on stubbornness, with a dash of everything else. Let's talk about what's kept you going. It's not just a fire, though that smoky hearth, remember crackle, has been your anchor. It's not just the gruel or the cow's warmth, though they've saved your skin more than once. It's the little things, the church's candles, the neighbor's stories, the way your kids still laugh at your terrible jokes. You've layered rags, whispered charms, and hauled with your blizzards, each act a tiny rebellion against the cold. A modern aside: imagine surviving a months-long blackout with nothing but a campfire, some old clothes, and your family's bad jokes. These peasants were tougher than nails, and you're feeling their grit in your bones, every aching step of the way. You're not out of the woods yet. The grain's low, the snow's still deep, and spring's a promise, not a guarantee. But you're starting to notice signs, a drip from the roof, a bird chirping like it's got news. You're checking the animals, mending your cloak, and rationing the last of peas, all while dreaming of green fields. You joke to your spouse that you will dance naked when the first flower blooms, and they snort, saying they'd rather see the cow dance. It's a spark of levity, and you hold it close, like that warm stone from the church. You're a peasant, and survival's your badge of honor, earned through every shivering night. The night's settling in now, softer than before, the wind a low murmur instead of a roar. You pull the rags over your family, their warmth a quiet comfort against your side. The hut's still rough, the straw still pokes, but you're here, together, alive. The fire's glow is fading, but it's enough to see the faces around you, tired, smudged, but unbroken. You whisper a final story, your voice slow and gentle, about a seed sleeping under the snow, waiting for its moment to rise. Your kids' eyes flutter close, their breaths deep and even, and you feel your own eyelids grow heavy. Winter's been a long, cold fight, but you've outlasted it, night by night, chore by chore. The world outside is softening, the frost loosening its grip, and you're daring to dream of warmth, of green, of a new day. You're a peasant, forged in the cold, and you've earned this rest. Let the wind hum, let the fire sigh, and let sleep carry you gently into spring's embrace. You've made it, and that's enough.